Good afternoon, everyone. Welcome to dtalks or Disruptive Talks on Literacy and Education. I'm your host, Mashood. The question of digital divide had always been there since the digital age started, but post the pandemic, there has been much more awareness and attention to the severe inequalities with respect to access to digital, and especially with school closures to digital education. And it is something which is here for discussion. It is something that will require both short term as well as long term attempts in a mission mode as well. And to really understand as to where we stand with respect to the digital divide in today's time, and with respect to how that has impacted education and what can be the way forward. We have a very special speaker who's joining us. He is a change manager and in the venture and fellowship program at Ashoka. Ashoka, as we know, is a leading community, is a global community of more than 3,500 social entrepreneurs, and many of them have been leaders in their areas of work, including education as well. And today's speaker, he also is in a way has a very special interest in entrepreneurship as well, and especially entrepreneurship with respect to social change. So it's wonderful for us to welcome Mr. Raghav Khemka from
Thank
Ashoka.
you.
Raghav, truly an honor to have you here on Detox, and we really look forward to learning more about what your vision for change is in education, learning. Looking forward to learn more about what Ashoka's vision for change is and how Ashoka's community is engaging with the current pandemic and the way forward.
Thank you so much for the kind words. So I just want to give maybe a second or two into explaining what Ashoka does, and then we can go into the topic of today. So Ashoka is an organization that's been there for about 40 years now, and what we do is create social entrepreneurs and find leading social entrepreneurs of our time. And we've been doing this for the last 40 years, but today we have also started working very deeply over the last 20 years with students and children so that we develop the next generation of change makers. And by that, what I mean is we believe that everyone in the world must become a change maker to make the impact necessary to create the level of change and complexity that exists in today's arenas, because you can't have a single champion anymore taking charge and leading the course. So Ashoka believes very deeply in a distributed network of social entrepreneurs that have what we call distributed leadership, that build in leaders in all aspects of their work, not only in what their vision for a specific sector is, but also they bring together the different missions of these individuals and take them together in building the foundations of these different sectors. So, taking that into consideration, today Ashoka's India Fellowship has about 50% of people working in education. And during the pandemic, we have realized certain gaps and certain problems that have existed in the system that we haven't really found solutions to till such time that we've come to have very deep consequences from these issues, and they are not no more just symptoms of a problem. They've become the disease themselves. So you will get a better understanding as I go through it. So the topic today that I've been given was education in the times of COVID and the digital divide that comes with it. So the overall picture today is, when we have a country that has already a high rate of dropouts, has a low learning outcome rate, who's not very resilient to shocks, they're not built very well to take these deep effects that happen into the system, and they have long-term effects on the population as well as the student population that exists. So today, about 320 million learners in India have been affected by the pandemic and have had to transition to e-learning as schools and colleges shut down. There's been a huge disparity between regions as well as households for internet access and the technology required to make this transition. So not only students but also educators, where teachers were not given adequate training or ability to transition to an e-learning only system. The rapid shift that was prompted by the pandemic has shown us the great digital divide that exists between urban India and rural India, as well as in urban India, the divide that exists between high income families and low income families. So, as we move into the future, we need to look at this not only from an education point of view, but we need to look at it from an economic point of view. We need to look at it from a digital policy point of view. We need to look at it in a holistic sense of how much parent engagement we require, how much uh, training and support we require for students and educationists. What are the different methodologies we can implement if it cannot be only based on smartphones or a laptop based methodology? So we'll have to look at radio and television and a whole bunch of different resources. So what today India is facing is a huge short term learning outcome effect, which is affecting students from not getting properly educated in their subjects or going to class. The extended closures that have happened for younger grades has caused a huge loss of human capital as well as huge opportunity in the economy. In the long run, this will affect all spaces of the economy, because as we bring in the next batch of students through higher education for employment in engineering, in medicine, in other fields, they will not have had the same experiences as their counterparts before them, because they don't have the peer learning experiences or the physical experiences of the labs and the other methodologies that go into their education process. So to understand the gap today, it is basically a twofold problem. You do not have adequate access to technology, or you do not have access to electricity to take advantage of this online education model. So, in a recent survey done by the Ministry of Rural Affairs and Development, they found that 47% of Indian households don't receive more than 12 hours of electricity, and about 36% of all schools in India don't have electricity at all. So this would basically suggest people who have a higher standard of living can transition much more easily to an online platform, versus individuals with a lower income finding it much more difficult, as well as not having access to technology or the internet or electricity to move into this new tech savvy e-learning platform model of learning. The second problem is the affordability argument that comes in, which is, if you do not have the money to pay for an internet connection or have access to an internet plan on your phone, you are basically cut off from this entire system, and you are not able to access the e-learning platforms that are being provided. Second is, you don't have the one-on-one experience that you have in a school setting, where you can go and speak to a teacher in person and have a discussion with them, go through the different problems that you might be going through and get solutions to this. This is not only to say it's for the students, but also the teachers, where they can't really detect what is happening with the students, and they might not be trained well enough to transition to an online teaching methodology, which gives them a lower rate of effect on their teaching. So they might not know what their students are doing. They might not be able to convey the concepts as effectively as in person. And also, finally, they might not be able to do the practical aspects of this work as well. So that is the problem. The situation as it exists today is that we have enough dropout rates when we have schools that are open and in person, but as the lockdown and the pandemic has raged throughout the 20 year, we realized that so many migrant workers have been moving across different states and moving with their families. And a majority of the unorganized organized sector in India has been disrupted quite deeply, which means that these migrant workers are taking their kids back home or moving around with them to find a new job, where which means that they are not getting the education from a physical school, neither online, because they don't have the ability to log in or do online learning in the first place. Also, the new economic effects on their families' livelihoods has reduced their ability to go to school, where they would be either put into a job to raise money for the family, or have different household jobs that might be taken over by them because their mother or father both are working during this time to meet basic needs. The next key indicator that we had to look at was what is the rate of internet access. And it's less than 15% in rural India, and in urban and India it's about 42%. But again, depending on your um, economic um, and livelihood statuses, you have again a big disparity. And what we realized more than anything else, the people that were being affected the most were girls in vulnerable households who were facing, as I mentioned, domestic duties because their parents were both working, and they were giving these tasks to these girls, um, as they didn't have the ability to put them on to online education methodologies. So a lot of girls were dropping out, while the gadgets or the smartphones were reserved for the male children, as their education was prioritized. So these children were affected more deeply. We heard of more child labor cases and child marriage cases that came about as well. Um, so when we take these two issues together, as I mentioned, when we move into a more digitalized learning platform, you have to look at the economic policies as well as understand what are the different at-home technologies that you can use to actually create the level of education that you need or require in these areas without creating these inequalities of class and caste that exist. Uh, the second thing that we need to realize is this is a problem that's not only a government school problem, but also a private school problem. Both have to kind of figure out what is the best ways to enable a transition to online learning for future generations, as well as enable a better format of education for these children to bridge this divide that exists and create a more sustainable education platform for students to excel in all their different aspects and develop as holistic individuals. So today, as it stands, 1 in 5 children were enrolled in school but are not offered by their institutions or schools online um, learning tools or platforms where they could have classes. And only half of these children actually attend, even if offered online classes, due to either lack of electricity, lack of internet, or smart devices that would allow them to do this. And this is again seen greater in low income households versus high income households. Um, so again, what the government and private schools try to then implement is low tech initiatives of doing it through SMS or phone calls or even through television and radio. So, oh, my graphs are not showing that. So when we look at this graph, we realize that the access by income of a household, high percentage of individuals do not have access to any kind of resources if they come from low income households, while high income households still have a lower percentage of individuals. Radio is only for low income, only for high income households to a certain extent, versus tablets and computers again is reserved for high income households. But as you look down into the television and slowly into the smartphone areas, you see the divides getting higher and higher. While low income households use more television as a tool for education and other means, high income households are using telephone, internet, as well as smartphones to do most of this work, as well as tablets and computers. The same thing goes down from private schools to government schools. You see government schools using more televisions versus private schools using more internet based tooling. Then we move into the last one, which is based on gender. And the percentage access for girls for smartphones and internet is higher in high income households versus low income households, but the male children in low income households again use these two more, versus television again is a very good tool overall, versus the last two of radio and computers being less. The attendance ratio again is something that's very unique here, and it goes contradictory to the data percentages, where if the female child is going to school daily or mostly daily, they are more likely to stick around and they keep attendance records better than their male counterparts. But if they start to come less than a week, the ratios start to drop off again very rapidly in favor of the male children turning up to class more than the female ones. Um, so I would like to just sit on the solution aspect for a bit and discuss certain aspects of what needs to be done, as well as what we need to look at as we move into the future in case of other lockdowns or emergencies like this. What would be the protocol that schools must think about and start following as well? So, looking at the gaps and the problems that exist today, we need to work more closely with health authorities to plan the safe and clinical reopening of schools so that we have in-person schooling restart as soon as possible. This would also include uh, getting the health departments to start to look at vaccination for children, and look at the possibilities of how the virus might transmit from one student to the next. In case it is a problem, then to figure out protocols and guidelines for schools so that they can open safely and not get students infected with the coronavirus or have any issues by opening up schools. The second thing, it has to be the re-evaluation of the foundations of these children. So understanding what literacy rate are they at, what mathematical skills have they developed, where are they personally in this journey of development as a student, where are their critical skills at, what are their scorings at, and where at a national level do they fall in track. So that we have a baseline evaluation of where students are, and to develop personalized experiences for them, or even a more clinical approach in what needs to be concentrated upon more when schools reopen, giving the trainings to the teachers as well as the students so that they don't fall behind and create a gap in their learning experiences, especially for higher school students as we move forward. Um, we also need to look at expanding access to digital devices, connectivity, and guidelines for how to use e-learning platforms, ed tech platforms, and how to use this best to align with the students' levels as they are today, so that they can improve certain aspects of their learning at home as well after school, or if they're not able to enter school for other reasons. Um, this is a very important aspect. So I want to maybe talk about a second or two about this, where we can't just look at it from a singular perspective of give more tablets or phones to kids, but we need to look at it from a systemic point of view. We need to be able to train teachers to do better classes online and have effective what do you say subject matter as well as class plans, so that they have more effective outcomes from their lesson plans as well as their classes. We also need to function better on the infrastructure elements of it. So can we create community based internet access in rural areas? Can we enable more digital infrastructure to reach rural India, so that we have better access to the tools that we require today, and not only for educational purposes but also government interactional purposes, and financial purposes, and a whole bunch of other tools that digital India has enabled for urban India. These have to seep into rural India, and the best strategy to do this would be a community based methodology. And I would implore everyone who is on this talk with me today to look up what one of our Ashoka fellows is doing, Osama Manzoor. His organization is called the Internet Freedom Foundation. They're doing excellent work in creating this digital infrastructure in rural India, um, which can then be utilized by other parties for educational purposes, for financial purposes, for whole myriad of different solutions to be implemented in these areas. And the last is we need to look at providing support for the affected individuals throughout this pandemic, not only financially but also emotionally, where a lot of people might have lost family members or parents or children during this pandemic time, and requires support and counseling and help to develop fully and enable them to progress and become holistic human beings by the end of their educational journeys. And I just like to thank everyone for listening through my short presentation, I would imagine.
Thank you, Raghav, for this very uh, very comprehensive overview about the digital divide, and you've really hit the nail on its head by kind of really demonstrating the inequalities which exist at so many various levels, and especially with respect to gender. The statistics are actually very disturbing, but you've also shared certain ideas for the way forward with respect to building digital infrastructure, uh, and it's truly become like the right to technology has in a way become right to education almost in today's time. So thank you for helping us think on those questions, and it's truly very important to continue discussing this till there is a solution, because because there are like a lot of conversations around this, but is the noise actually helping the decision makers to kind of take action? Until they don't take action, the discussion needs to carry on. So some questions that we had was with respect to you mentioned and you're associated with the Ashoka change makers, and we know that you have a network of some phenomenal entrepreneurs and people who are making change. With respect to inequality in education and digital education, would you like to share a bit more as to how the network of Ashoka changemakers have been working in this specific area of education inequality? Would you like to share some success stories and some learnings on that front?
Sure. So a few of our fellows have been working on RTE, where a lot of state governments have been refusing to actually accept it. So how do you get private schools to start enabling RTE to come in, so that they have a reservation of about 15 to 25% of their class to underprivileged students, to create an holistic educational system that is not dependent very drastically on just the government, but also enabling a mixing of different socio-economic classes to allow progression and allow more inclusion and allow more empathy to grow in student populations, right? The biggest issue today is that we aren't empathetic to our own brethren, because we've not been taught this from a young age. We've not been introduced to these concepts of empathy, of creative problem solving abilities from a very young age, so that we don't develop these skill set at a later stage. So a lot of our fellows are functioning on developing skill sets with children to give them a holistic education, as well as introduce them to broader concepts of what is happening in their ecosystems, what are the different problems that they might be facing in the future. How do you become a change maker to solve problems in your community rather than wait for someone to come and help you? So we have fellows like that. We have fellows working on digital inclusion and education. So you would have had heard of Dream a Dream with Vishal Talreja. We have Osama working on the infrastructure aspect of creating the digitalization of India. We have Quest Alliance working on content and creation of tools so that we can progress to a better standard of e-learning in India. We have platforms that enable people to get jobs post that. So if you are gone to an ITI today, how do you become a licensed plumber, licensed electrician, licensed individual that can earn a livelihood and a respectable livelihood from this career choice? How do you become a lawyer and progress through that and become a judge at a certain point of time? So today, India has about 10 to 20 families that run a majority of these judgeships, and they've been circulating in the same circles. So we don't have individuals coming from lower socioeconomic backgrounds becoming lawyers, becoming judges, coming into that frame of context. So we have fellows working on that space. In a lot of different ways, what we've realized is we need to work deeply on inclusion in the education space, which then allows us to build out the aspects of what is required in education in different spaces. So if you come from a low social economic background, what are the abilities that you need? What are the different skill sets you need to be trained with? If you are a student that is coming in at a much later stage, so today we're only looking at students who are below 18, but a large percentage of the population that dropped out want to come into the education system today, say because they can get a salary bump in what they're doing today if they had a 12 standard certificate, if they had a 10 standard certificate. So they could get a clerical job already where they're working, and they could get a salary increase of about 20 to 30%. So how do we function with those individuals who work in the day and might want to get an education at night? So we have Nikita Karkal in Bombay running night schools and helping these individuals come in. So she works with three generations. She works with grandmothers, mothers, and children from the same family in the same classroom, and educating all three at the same time. And it's a unique proposition again. How do you develop livelihood skills for these individuals so that they get a job post that? Or if they already have a job, how can they get a better income if they do the certification? And what is the process of night schooling, and how do you do all of that? So we have different aspects of education covered in different spaces, and then we work with different governments to in creating. So state government, we worked with the Delhi state government to curate and help with the happiness curriculum, and how do you implement that in throughout a board system, and what are the different partners you need to develop. So we work in that kind of space where we try to figure out holistically what are the different gaps in education, who do we need to function or find entrepreneurs who are gapping these problems, and then connect them with one another to build the foundations of the entire sector itself. So you would have had another speaker on this talk where you had Mr. Madhukar, who runs FES, where he's working with different schools and different state boards to enable middle management to get training, where they have the budgets for the state education disbursements, but they don't know how to use that money, and they have crores and crores of rupees sitting with them at sanctionable powers, but they don't know what to do with it. So giving them the training to implement what maybe an IS officer has said today, or put in policy, it becomes easier if the middle management of the bureaucracy also has the understanding and the training to implement that vision and that thought process, and then bring it down to the students and the teachers at a later stage. So we see all these different gaps that exist, and we try to function in this space to try to figure out what are the main places where we can connect and collaborate to create the impact at scale.
Right. Thank you, Raghav, for sharing your thoughts on that. It's a very important point which you mentioned about how it's important to kind of identify gaps, right? And uh, people in different sectors, be it governments, be it civil society organizations, like they have the expertise, they have their they know what to do and what the problems are, but essentially what is often required is a catalyst, right, which kind of brings these different stakeholders together, and that's something which Ashoka is doing, and it's wonderful to learn about this community as well, and some of the stories which you shared. And it's something which also kind of goes kind of similar to what we here talk about when we're talking about literacy, and and a people's movement. Yeah, another thing which really resonates with what we are talking about here is the early years, right, of a child. And you mentioned that um, empathy and these important skills are so important from starting from the very early ages. So uh, when Ashoka is working with the entrepreneurs, and when we are working in the early years, so the impact or the outcomes are there are realized at different gestation periods, right? So there might be, with respect to, let's say, foundational literacy, you might be able to see uh, a part of the outcomes in terms of foundational skills in a shorter period, but then how that translates into long-term development happens in a longer gestation period. So how does Ashoka uh, evaluate or review uh, the work which its fellows are doing, and how are the goals defined? How are the how is, because there's a lot of passion, but how are the goals defined, especially when you're working in education with these entrepreneurs? Uh, your thoughts on that?
So basically, what we do as an organization is we take up a sector as a whole. We don't look at it in piecemeal. So, say if we need to solve the issues in the education sector today, we need to solve a bunch of different issues, not just one singular issue, right? So we need to solve access to information. Second is access to schooling. So many children do not even enter schooling when we have enrollment, but the dropout rates are so high, or the children don't turn up as attendance because they might have different socio-economic problems at home, where they might be sent to work to create a livelihood for their families rather than the schooling. Even if they're given a free meal or given free education, it's a negative economic cost on the family because they're losing livelihood. This child could be earning them some money, versus if he goes to school, he will be subtracting from that. So it's a mindset issue at a certain stage as well, where certain parents might send their male children to school but keep their female children at home to do household tasks. Breaking down those mindsets. Certain might be logistical, like I mentioned, the 1.4 migrant workers, they don't have a stable setting. So today, if you had to educate people that were construction workers kids, it would be very, very difficult because they're not in one location. So today, if you're trying to teach those children and put them through formal education, you will have them jumping through at least 350 schools, because in their lifespan from birth to 18, they're guaranteed education till 8th grade. But post that, it's not guaranteed. But to get to 8th grade itself, they need to be going to school on a daily basis, which is not possible for a lot of these parents because they are on different sites at different parts of the year. They keep moving around, they keep doing a lot of different things, and the kids get affected deeply from it. This is just like a small gap I'm showing you, right? So in this, there are multitudes of different gaps. So what we do is we bring in all the different players. So not only educationalists working on education, but people who are functioning on livelihoods. How do we build more sustainable livelihoods for these individuals so that they can take their kids, put them in school, have a very clear, concrete plan of getting them educated, giving them a better life overall, and having enough for their family to continue without these kids coming into the job force before necessary. Then we have individuals working on, as you mentioned, literacy and education. How do you track what standard of education you're giving in each of these schools? how is it being standardized across platforms? Is it being able, are students and teachers being able to absorb the material that you're giving them and be able to experience it in the way it's meant to be? Um, are we building enough communicational networks, transportation networks to allow these students to come in and go out easily? So certain families do not allow their female girls to go to school because they have to go through areas that might cause them eve teasing or different issues, and the parents are like, it's not worth it. We don't want our child to get harmed or hurt during this process. So how do we build communication between law enforcement so that in school paths or school roads, that these are secured so students can walk freely and not have be bothered or harassed while they're doing this whole process? Then we have caste issues, so we bring in individuals working on different rights and movements so that we don't have casteist politics coming into the education system. So a child who goes through will not necessarily need to state their caste, or their school or their classroom won't know their caste, and so everyone's treated equally. Then, as I mentioned, inclusion is a very deep aspect that we need to function on. So what are the sectors or what are the skill sets today that are very reserved or cordoned off for a large percentage of the population? I can give you one simple skill set in um, non-technical space, which is pattern making for the cloth industry and fashion designing. So today we can create a lot of people that could sew things and be good seamstresses, but they're not going to be designers. They don't have the creative ability that is necessary to create a pattern. They don't have the science or the math skills to do that, and it's also very reserved. So today you would always see a tailor being called a master G, who can make the pattern. Everyone else, if you would see, would be just the stitchers. And that's the big thing. It only moves from a male generation to the next male in that family. It doesn't transcend from that, even in a space today that we want to create more equality in this generation that is coming about. um, the same goes for lawyers, like I was explaining, who become judges. So people coming from a lower or different classes and castes, basically lower castes and lower classes, do not become judges today. They remain as lawyers, and only a few families progress through that space. um, and so forth. There are so many inequalities in so many different job spaces. So how do we break down those barriers, allow more individuals to come in? um, so like this, we curate a group of 13 to 14 different individuals to work on the foundations of a sector, and then build out the different policy needs, the different all the different bits that you might need to solve the problem of the sector, so you have a foundation.
Very, very interesting, Raghav. Thanks for sharing this, and it's quite phenomenal. The efforts of Ashoka to bring people together, right? So, like, I mean, you've spoken about the digital uh, divide and how that has impacted education, and it's a question of uh, it's a question of inequality of income, of geographical inequality, gender inequality. Then there's also a question of pedagogy, of teaching. Are the teachers equipped to deal with it, right? And a lot of so it's not just like that one particular area of the puzzle is solved and then the whole problem is solved. That's not the case, and that's why you have to bring people to kind of solve all these pieces together. Uh, but uh, what we also see is that there are certain challenges when it comes to collaborations, right? And that of course is obvious that when you have people with different ideas, with different often different approaches to solving a problem, and everyone's trying to convince each other of that this is the best approach, etc. uh, how does Ashoka address those conflicting ideas and approaches? And also we see in the social development sector that often impact and evidence of impact becomes like this super important piece of information, or the super important piece which often helps kind of demonstrate the impact of an organization or an individual. Often funding is given based on the evidence of impact. So when ideas come together, and this is how it should be, that ideas come together to solve the problem holistically, how does Ashoka address these challenges that that goes beyond the egos and the different agendas of individuals and brings them together to solve a common problem?
Okay, so I would like to give you an analogy for this. So, a majority of how the world looks at different social problems is we look at the symptoms of the disease. We don't really look at what is causing the disease itself. So, what a majority of different organizations do is what we call direct service or a lot of direct service, where it is working on the symptoms of a problem rather than the disease itself, and it creates parallel systems to do that. So you keep trying to solve, say you have a cold, you keep trying to solve the runny nose, but you don't really try to solve why you got the cold in the first place. So you never fight the disease, but you keep fighting its symptoms. Today, what Ashoka does is we try to fix the disease itself. So we don't function on the symptoms first. We look at what the disease is, and then we try to finish the disease off, and then start to target off the symptoms, so that we have a holistic end to the problem. If we keep trying to finish the symptoms, the disease will keep creating new symptoms. But if we kill the disease itself and then finish off the symptoms that come from it, it will not create new symptoms. We will be done with this one problem and we can move to the next. So when we look at impact and we look at what needs to be done in a collaborative nature, what we realized is when government schools were given opportunities to take different support from NGOs, or IS officers were given charge of saying that these people have to be given access. What happened is one government school had 5 different NGOs working in it, and all 5 NGOs were kneecapping the next NGO. So what was happening is we were actually making a counter effect on what we were trying to do. So our inputs were not matching our outputs. And what I mean by that is what we're trying to give to our stakeholder communities were not matching the impact that we were looking for at the end of it. And the teachers were getting demotivated, the principals were getting demotivated, saying that these guys are coming in anyways. And what it did over a period of time is disenfranchised a lot of schools and principals and teachers from taking help from the social sector. So what we do is more systemic, as I mentioned, and what we try to achieve is a framework element change, which is normative change in society. uh, at a system level, you don't really operate against the system or in parallel to the system, but you try to function within the system, and you try to figure out what are the gaps that are causing these inefficiencies to happen. So if you can fix the inefficiencies at a systemic level, you have an impact on a larger number of schools really quickly, because these innovations travel through the network very quickly. If one principal calls the next principal saying that my this problems have been solved, why don't you try this, it becomes very quick for adoption for the next principal. And it's not done by an organization, it's done by the system that's necessarily responsible for it. You're just giving them the tooling required to do that. So what we concentrate at Ashoka also is for entrepreneurs that look at a lifetime of their organization. So they say we have 5 to 10 years for our organization. We will achieve our impact and we will shut down. We will not be necessary in this world anymore. That is true impact. Because if I do not need to exist today for my work to continue on, that is impact that is of community nature, because it's taken up by the community. It's not anchored by an organization or an individual or a hero. It's anchored by a community. And that's where the change really happens, because they see the true value of the solution and they start implementing it in their own communities. Did that answer your
Right.
question, or did I go a little off
Uh,
topic?
yes, it definitely kind of addresses the question, but it raises another question which I would like to ask in conclusion, Raghav. It's again very important point that you've raised about kind of like not creating parallel systems, but trying to fix the system from within, right? And essentially, what when we talk about again bringing back the issue of literacy. So why we have this forum as D for disruptive is the idea that incremental change and how things had been going with respect to improving foundational skills was just going too slow, and what is required is a disruption in this very slow progress, and especially after the pandemic, where the UNESCO is saying like 2 decades of gains in education have been wiped out because of the pandemic. What we are saying is that a disruption will be required, and that would often, in some sense, might uh, kind of require changes which are transformational as compared to incremental, and might maybe require some kind of actions and efforts which take the system to a new equilibrium, uh, maybe a new parallel system which the system gravitates towards. Uh, what are your thoughts?
So that's a very good point you raised. But what happens with large scale systems like we have today, and especially in education, if you create disruption, as I mentioned on the call and through the presentation, it will affect a small layer of the society first, and that disruption doesn't transform down very effectively. So like I give you the example of Uber today, right? Uber was a groundbreaking disruption throughout the world for enabling transportation for everyone, right? You can get a cab easily at your door at any point of time, um, without a thought process involved in it. You go to rural India, that doesn't exist. So the disruption again is unequal. We need to find a disruption that is equal. For that kind of disruption, it cannot happen in a year or two. It has to be normative shift. How do people see a specific system, and how do they now see it needs to evolve too? If they see problems in it, or they see a solution in it, they need to say, okay, this is the way it needs to be done today. Today, there is no standard understanding of that in education, right? If I have to go and say I want to get my child educated, you have 13 different methodologies. I can go through the Rishi Valley education system, which is holistic. I can go through the extremely traditional methodologies of convent schooling. I can go through a Montessori system. I can go through the French and Ananda style from Pondicherry. I can go through a multitude of different things, from international boardings to anything in the middle, right? So for a person to choose today what they want to do, and even in basic literacy, there is so many different points of view of how to do it, that each one is fighting and handicapping the other one. So to create that large scale disruption, we need to find a solution that works for everyone and works in the frameworks of what we need as humanity for the next generation. Because the skill sets we teach children today are not the skill sets they utilize in the next 10 to 20 years. The skill sets are changing too rapidly for that to happen. What we need to enable children to do is build up the curiosity within them that will allow them to flourish as holistic individuals. They can pick up any skill, they can re equip themselves, they can do what is necessary for them to survive and thrive in the next coming years, rather than being dependent on a system that is training them for the industrial complex that does not exist very clearly anymore as we move into the fourth industrial complex, where skill sets and learnings have to evolve on a rapid basis. And what Ashoka's greatest fear and what we function to kind of gap very deeply is not to be left behind. Like the same thing happened during the agricultural to the industrial revolution, where a whole bunch of people were left behind and were disadvantaged to a great deal. Um, this will happen again in this, from this industrial revolution to the fourth industrial revolution of computers and technology and a whole bunch of different things, because you will leave a large percent of the population deprived again. And the people who have the capital and have the means and have the understanding will grow very rapidly. You see that divide already happening today, with the 1% gaining more and more wealth versus the 99% shrinking in income as well as wealth, because capital makes more capital. Labor is not making more money on labor anymore. So the mindset and the thought processes have to shift. You have to create more entrepreneurs. You have to be able to create more thinkers, where we have been standardly creating more command, like operational individuals, people who could understand a command and operate and do that. We need people who have ideas and innovators and creatives. We don't need people who can operate on that base level anymore, because computers are coming in to do a better job of that. So today I don't need a lawyer to go to draft an argument, because an AI could probably go through my country's laws and create a framework document for me saying that this law applies for you for this purposes, blah 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 blah. But I still need a lawyer to argue that fact in court and have the communication and effectiveness with me. But I don't need a lawyer today to know every law in the book anymore. I need him to be creative enough to use those laws in a creative argument so that it favors my end. But I don't need him to be a clerical individual to go through thousands of books to create that argument.
Right. Very profound, Raghav, and it's like some of the points that you made with respect to how like how education is something which needs to be made much more relevant. And I mean, it is definitely one field which has so many questions, existential questions, and questions of where the direction we are heading, and so many different ideas. And maybe that's why 50% of the Ashoka change makers are in education. And but it's great that I mean the vision is more with respect to like I really liked what you said, that a lot of people around the world have these great ideas fixing the symptoms, but uh, if one symptom goes down, the other comes back again. What we have to fix is the actual root causes of the disease, and you and your team are doing a phenomenal job with respect to getting all these specialists and doctors to come together as well, to fix some of the major challenges which our world faces today. So, Mr. Raghav Khemka, again, thank you so much for joining us
Yes.
on Detox. I really enjoyed your talk, and we hope that all those who are watching and who will be watching this video in the coming time as well as we share it further, are they mull over the thoughts that you've shared, the ideas of change that you have shared. You've definitely had a very comprehensive presentation on the digital divide, but we also shared some very important food for thought with respect to how we need to reimagine education and the stakeholders and the change makers in the education system, what their role is. Once again, thank you, Raghav.
Thank you so much. Wonderful to be here, and thank you for the platform. I hope this gives some more um, disruption and thought process in this segment. But my last words, I would say, if you want true disruption in education, you need to create curiosity in our children, in the kids from first grade onwards. Must be extremely curious individuals who can question and contribute to changing the status quo than accepting the status quo. Thank you for
Thank
that.
you. Thank you, Raghav.